The lines and shapes of the natural world seem blurry and chaotic, as though they were all the result of a huge mess. But only at first glance. Are there no straight lines in nature? What about right angles? Don't these exist? Plants and animals have evolved with shapes that are so strange, whimsical, and curious as to suggest that there were no rules governing each individual, except the free adaptation to the world around him. But there are rules. Rules that mathematically govern the spiral growth of a shell, or the shape of leaves and trees. The number of petals on a flower is no accident, nor is the arrangement of feathers on a bird's wing. Nothing is random. It's not coincidence that dictates the spherical shape of many seeds and fruits, or the pattern in a spider web, or the way ants move. A detailed look shows us that everything obeys a certain organizing principle, with the possible exception of the scales on a crocodile's jaws. Wild geometry may not seem as perfect as our own. Or is it that we are confused, and it is our geometry which is too strict? Whatever the answer may be, biomimicry and all of our sciences will have much to learn in the future from nature's geometry. Feathers have extremely complex geometrical designs, which vary according to their function. That's why no two feathers on a bird's body are exactly alike. The variety of structures and curves on feathers has inspired our mathematics on many occasions. But feathers don't function on their own. In order to fly, they must be used all at once on a wing. Biomimicry continues to study bird flight. These prototypes have been carrying out tests and selection for millions of years. In the internal geometry of certain feathers, there is a hidden biotechnology that can be used to improve our aerodynamics. On the edge of each wing of the owl, on the part that has the most contact with the air when the bird is flying, there is a sophisticated sort of comb made with microfeathers in the shape of a parabola. Each one measures just 3 to 5 millimeters. Its morphology minimizes air friction, and the owl's wings do not produce any sort of sound while in flight. Biomimicry has discovered that by curving the straight edges of our plane wings, aerodynamic performance can be improved by up to 32%. Living beings are not aware of the mathematical laws they live by. Biomimicry is, although we have only just begun to discover the potential to be found in nature's many forms. Natural selection has always chosen the most efficient designs by applying the principle of least effort, building things with the least amount of energy in order to survive. This law can be expressed mathematically and can also be drawn. The principle of least effort is in large part spherical. Round shapes have proven to be a great engineering achievement in the movement to save energy in transport. In the case of the dung beetle, this means moving the greatest quantity of material with the least possible surface area. The principle of least effort is applied with the highest level of efficacy to several balls of dung. This is an age-old achievement. The first beetles to use the sphere must have done so hundreds of millions of years ago. We may have invented the wheel, but it is quite probable that we were inspired by these insects. Dung beetles make balls out of the feces of other animals, lay an egg inside them, and then bury them in the earth. Underground, the larva will have both food and protection as it grows. Some species of beetle are real masters, sculpting balls that are almost perfect. Others, like this one, take advantage of the natural shape of deer droppings, which are quite round to begin with. In order to spread around the greatest number of future offspring, with the greatest amount of food that will ensure the most survivors, the optimal tool that was selected was spherical in shape. Logically, mathematically, all of the geometric curves created by beetles may not be perfect, but the ground isn't perfect either. Irregularity against irregularity. Perhaps this works better for overcoming obstacles. This kind of imperfection is often seen in nature. Even the imperfect is known to follow a certain order. For some plant species, spreading their seed just a few meters, or even centimeters, is enough. A seed always tries to separate itself from the mother plant in order to avoid competing with her for soil or light. One of the simplest tricks is for seeds to be arranged in balls, or have a shape that can roll. As they fall from the branch, even the slightest slope will help them roll away. Vast dissemination isn't necessary. In fact, each species seeks to carpet the area with its own genes so that no other species can compete. That's how forests came to be, which under normal conditions are not biodiverse. Often, forests are made up of just one plant species. And this is almost always due to the spherical shape of its seeds. The interesting seeds of the dandelion are also spherical. Plants move very little or not at all. They just grow. Their geometry follows patterns that are quite different from those of dynamics. But the seeds of plants must move from one place to another. Sometimes as far away as possible. Dandelions have spread themselves over most of our spherical planet thanks to the wind and to the geometry of their cypsellas, which can fly almost endlessly. Suspended from a feathery web in the shape of a parabola, each genetic packet is carried along by the air currents. When the wind stops, there is a new possibility for life to begin. The geometry of the seeds has provided many valuable ideas to the science of aerodynamics. The spherical shape offers important characteristics that go beyond movement and are governed by the law of maximum and minimum. Of all geometric shapes, the ratio between area and enclosed volume is lowest in the sphere. This makes it the ideal shape for storing things and using the least amount of material to create the surface area that contains it. So a ball is a way of saving. Animals seek to conserve their body heat, and shapes that need to hold water or some other substance in their interior must be round or at least stocky. An egg tends to be rounded and with no corners, so that it doesn't damage the hen on its way out. But it also tends to be spherical in order to minimize the size of the opening in the female's body, while providing as much space as possible for the embryo. Obviously, there are many other factors that influence the shape of eggs in living beings. When it comes to snakes, it's understandable that their eggs are more oval in shape. The eggs of many turtles are almost spherical. This form gives them greater structural resistance, and since their nests are buried in the earth, the eggs are in no danger of rolling or getting lost. Meanwhile, bird eggs can't be completely spherical, because rolling and falling out of the nest must be avoided at all costs. The shape of a bird egg is a conical oval, which is clearly asymmetrical, and there's a reason for that. The shell is hard, but normally quite thin, because it's expensive to make. So an egg is very delicate. If an egg is discovered by a predator, the risk to the embryo is very high. Although geometry lends it more protection than we might think. Not many creatures have a mouth that is big enough to trap this strange rolling ball. Plus, even though the egg rolls, it always tends to end up in the same spot. When the mother returns to her brood, if the egg isn't very far from where she left it, she generally rearranges it without giving it a second thought. The beaded lizard is principally a scavenger, but it will go crazy over an egg. This one is nearly too big for his mouth. He's having problems sinking his teeth into such a curved surface. Evolution maintains the balance between egg size and how wide their predators are able to open their jaws. Vaulted domes relieve pressure. Renaissance architects could have told you that. From a single cell to an entire planet, the highest level of order tends toward a spherical shape, symmetrical in every direction. Although there are other levels of order. What makes a galaxy spiral-shaped? The same as a butterfly tongue or a snail shell. It's the golden ratio that organizes almost everything. Endless shapes and proportions can be found as a result of this number, also known as phi. In geometry, phi emerges from a simple drawing. When the upper vertex connected to the center of the base of a square is folded down like this, the sides of the rectangle formed by A and B are in the golden ratio, or phi. This rectangle, thought to be the most aesthetically pleasing of all, is also the most efficient. It's the shape living things choose subconsciously. And it's hidden all around us, even in the facial features of a possible mate. We always prefer the golden ratio. The number of petals on a flower is no accident of fate or beauty either, but rather reflects the efficiency of phi. Plants have flowers and leaves that are modified by colors that aim to grab one's attention. They must be seen by insects, attracting them so strongly that a plant can reproduce better than another one growing nearby, and ensure that its genes will be conserved over time. For a species to propagate and evolve, it must be highly attractive. Perhaps this is what we call beauty. Geometry is hidden in beauty, and living creatures differentiate and choose the most optimal measurements and proportions. Whether or not we are aware that we detect them, we are always looking for patterns in everything. A bird, or even a small insect, can identify something that is beautiful or ordered, even if it can't count or get excited about it. Let's count the petals on the flowers. The petals, or the bracts, their number holds a secret. 1 petal, 2, 3 small bracts, 5 petals, 8, 13, 21, 33, 54 petals. Once again, these numbers seem random, but they aren't. The number of flower petals follows a pattern. The numbers in the sequence first identified by mathematician Leonardo Fibonacci. Each new number is the result of the sum of the previous two numbers in the series. The number of petals is often in keeping with this sequence, especially on flowers with many petals, because each petal must maximize its visibility. In other words, each petal needs to be as visible as possible and be covered by the one on top of it as little as possible. When petals are covered up, they're no longer useful to the plant. Maximum attraction with minimum cost, as always. In order to achieve this, plants also make use of phi, the most important number in the world. If we use the two segments that make up that proportion to make a circle, the angle generated measures 137.5 degrees. Every time this perfect angle is repeated, the new petal covers up the one next to it as little as possible. The leaves on plants and trees are organized using the same pattern, according to the golden ratio. At least they tend to be. Many circumstances influence the geometry of plants, but the main objective of each leaf, each branch, is to ensure the greatest exposure to sunlight, so that photosynthesis can be carried out most efficiently. Even on the same plant, the leaves are competing with each other so that the plant can grow taller as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, it is also struggling with the plant right next to it, competing for light. In the war to capture energy and space, the golden ratio is your best ally. If we take two equal squares and draw another one next to them, with sides that are twice as long as the first two, we'll get a rectangle with sides that maintain the golden ratio, or phi. If we repeat this sequence indefinitely, we will generate the structure on which the geometric spiral is based. One of the most common curves in nature. Interestingly, like flower petals, the numbers used to organize the spirals of sunflower seeds, for example, or the groups of spines on a cactus, are those found in the Fibonacci sequence. It's as if there were no escape from the spiral vortex, or the golden ratio. Wild numbers are predictable. All of nature seems to obey this law obsessively. But the principle of least effort is the basic law that orders and creates dimensions in the most optimal way. We've done well in applying nature's spiral to our technology, thus making it more respectful of the world around us. The spiral can be found in most of nature's curves. Beaks and claws. Touch the inside of your teeth with your tongue. Do you feel that? Yes, it's a spiral. All teeth grow in a spiral pattern, just like the horns of an antelope, or a goat, or a deer. These are tools and weapons that are also elements of sexual selection. so they must be both beautiful and strong. The spiral ensures efficacy in both aspects. A spiral will create horns that are symmetrical, striking, and very resistant, using the least amount of material as it curves in on itself like a helix. Most horns are made of an inner core of bone, topped by layers that are somewhat similar to hair. The bone grows and stretches, and is soft in the beginning as it develops. The outer layers of horn are more rigid and tend to wrap around an axis of growth that does not coincide with the axis along which the bone grows. They don't coincide in direction or speed of growth. This difference leads to folds and curves in a regular pattern. In each species, the horn layers buckle over the bone like a helix, but with different contours depending on how the horn is used. The beautiful horns on these males are not just for decoration. They're weapons, perfectly balanced on their heads. A set of horns is amazingly adapted to the laws of gravity, so that the animal can move them about with the least amount of effort. The center of gravity for something that grows longer and heavier over time can be maintained if it grows in the shape of a spiral. Maintaining the center of gravity for a set of horns is fundamental if the animal is to wield it quickly and easily, to escape from predators, or to fight over a mate. One of nature's most interesting spirals is molded into a conical shape by the larvae of a very strange insect. In places with very fine sand, in hidden spots, in recesses that are protected from the rain and wind, where nothing bigger than an ant can walk through and wreck everything, engineering feats of incredibly delicate, simple perfection can be built. Just now, a female antlion is designing her shelter, which also serves as a trap for hunting. The incline of the cone varies according to the substrate, but on average it's about 45 degrees, making it nearly impossible to climb, even for an ant. The sand collapses on itself and doesn't allow for any kind of grip. What's more, the antlion larva throws even more sand out to ensure the prey is captured. It creates mini avalanches, causing the prey to slip and slide to a sandy death. The ferociousness and efficiency of this predator is only surpassed by its ability to build. When constructing the cone, it sinks its jaws below the surface of the sand and picks up a load on its head. Using a great deal of strength, it propels the material far away, while walking backward, repeating the movement over and over. Using this digging method, the insect follows a symmetrical curve, which gets narrower and narrower, creating a spiral that becomes the perfect conical hunting trap, or almost perfect. Beneath the spiral waves, hermit crabs have flourished in all of the Earth's seas and oceans. They've learned to hide inside old shells, using ones that have been discarded by other animals or left behind by animals that have been eaten. The hermit crab family has managed to avoid part of the rigidity of its exoskeleton, meaning they have not had to produce chitin, and their abdomen is soft and mobile. They're more vulnerable, but they are really only in danger on the days when they must change their shells because they're too old or too small. Obviously, the shell does not grow along with their bodies. Only a snail, the true owner of the shell, would know how to grow its own protective spiral. Snails have taught us how to develop spiral staircases, the complex structure of the compartmentalized shell of the nautilus. This shell has evolved to be able to resist pressure and balance out its flotation abilities in the ocean. Our submarines could learn quite a bit here. The orbicular thread from a spider also comes from a spiral movement. It's just that a silk that is fixed in a radius from one point to another seeks out the shortest physical path, and that path is straight. So there are straight lines in nature after all. The silk comes out of the spider's abdomen in a liquid state and dries immediately when it comes into contact with the air. As it sticks ordered segments onto the structure, a grid of symmetrical trapezoids is created with two parallel sides. They can be large or small according to the sort of prey the web weaver is trying to catch. These structures have served as a pattern for our nets, both primitive and modern. They have even given their names to the biggest nets of all, the Internet and the World Wide Web. Observing what spiders and other animals do, even the smallest of these, we should always ask ourselves, how does nature solve this problem, before setting out to invent something new? Spiders began by tracing straight lines and polygons. So the most efficient shape for them to make is the hexagon. If the ideal volume for containing things in 3D is the sphere, then the hexagon encloses the maximum area with the shortest perimeter in 2D. So in order to build a honeycomb while spending the least amount of wax, which is quite expensive, bees make symmetrical cells with 6 equal sides, or practically equal. We must remember that wild honeycombs are not flat, but are rather adapted to the terrain. So we might think this is a simple structure, but it's actually one of the most complicated pieces of architecture that exists. And the workers are many, and they have no blueprints. And obviously they have no boss screaming at them and insisting he's right. The geometry of the wild that is shared by bees and wasps has its own rules. And although it's full of micro-imperfections, could this be a system of adaptation? The law of the perfect hexagon was one that we only began to understand in the late 20th century. There aren't many geometrical shapes that the strict human brain can recognize easily in nature. Often wild geometry is hidden in the smallest of places, hard to detect beyond its defects. But there is a law that is much more visible: symmetry. Everything in nature that must move in a specific direction must be congruent on both sides of the axis that marks the direction it will move in. This is a fundamental law that is written in our genes, and which we have obviously incorporated in all of the mobile inventions we have designed. Animals have the shapes they have in large part because of their need to move. This is a fish. But instead of moving around in the water, it has to do so in the sand. Its scales are arranged in an overlapping pattern like roof tiles. They are flat plates that are highly polished, and they allow this strange animal to slide around with practically no friction. Its fingers have become fins. Its face is like a sharpened knife, a head that ends in a pointed triangular shape. The right geometry for swimming in the sands of the Sahara. The natural solutions that reduce friction in the sand, in the water, in the air, or inside our own organisms are based on geometric principles that are applied to all of our dynamic engineering feats. The tubes our vital liquids flow through are not laid out in right angles. Their paths are smooth curves that facilitate circulation. With no energy loss or rubbing, that could alter the system's temperature. And of course, the tubes are narrow in order to reduce the amount of material needed. We're also starting to see the design of biomimicry facilities. There are many patterns and many circumstances that influence the morphology of living beings and their many parts. If there were only one need and one pattern, we would all be exactly the same. And obviously, we're not. In fact, no two beings are the same. Every single tree trunk and leaf in the whole forest is unique. Leaves are arranged on branches so that they can search for light. The hair of mammals, the feathers of birds, the scales of reptiles are distributed symmetrically on the skin. The delivery mechanism for these appendages is genetic. One spatial pattern, written in the DNA, separates hair and feathers and scales in a way that is virtually equidistant, depending on the needs of each part of the body in each zoological class. The individuals in the same species have a similar number of hairs, almost the same number of feathers, or the exact same number of scales in the same shape. In fact, we can classify snake species just by looking at the geometry of the scales on their heads. The scales on the body of a crocodile also follow the pattern of their species, but the scales on their faces have just provided us with a scientific surprise that speaks to a new and interesting sort of order, an orderless order. Each facial scale, or domain, is an irregular polygon in a random shape. They haven't been determined by DNA. Instead, they are the result of a process of chance where probability overcomes genetics. This is a very significant event, indicating that there may be more orders than those controlled by our rigid mentality. The face of each crocodile is unique, just like the leaves in the plant kingdom. The same may be true of many other things that we just haven't noticed yet, like the polygons on the wings of a dragonfly. No two are completely the same, identical. Who is the artist behind these shapes, these lines, so efficient and so beautiful? The modernist architecture of the 20th century was clearly inspired by nature's seeming irregularity. Biomorphism, which originates from biomimicry, created designs that were more organic, with fewer straight lines and more curves. Laws that were less strict, a world that was more unpredictable. This geometry is less human, less rigid, less visible, wild, but also geometrical. Some distribution companies that have to deliver their products to many places are learning to organize their routes according to what is known as the principle of connecting parts. This is what ants seem to do in their colonies. In order to more quickly cover our main routes, we have focused on the movements in the colonies of social insects. At first glance, it may seem like the ants are moving chaotically, but each ant is picking up an odor of varying intensity. The level of intensity depends on how much time has passed since the preceding ant secreted its pheromones. And all of the ants strictly follow this rule while on their paths. So much so that each individual in the system makes its own decisions without having to consult with any kind of central control station. The ant that has made its own decision then secretes a pheromone for the ant coming up behind him. Biomimicry, mathematics, and geometry have designed an algorithm that seems to understand the disorder of the ant colony, somehow creating order out of chaos, or supposed chaos. Very few simple things can better illustrate how order comes out of chaos than the cocoon spun by a silkworm. For 24 hours, it spins a thread that is 2 kilometers long. With no known plan, but with no knots, and without using more thread in one spot than in another, the caterpillar arranges the material seemingly at random. Bit by bit, he creates a balanced oval-shaped container. That is, a sphere that is perfectly adapted to the elongated shape of a silkworm's body. Always maximum effectiveness, without geometrical fanaticism. It's not easy for our rigid and squared-off minds to discover with just one look all of the geometry that is hidden in nature. And there is a reason for this. A norm that keeps order itself hidden. Even perfection has its faults. Micro-variations that make natural selection between various individuals possible. And also evolution. That's the reason behind the imperfection of biogeometry.